Ask any country fan what's the most hallowed era of country music, and they're gonna tell you 90s country. It had that perfect mix of danceability, organic instrumentation, and silliness. I mean, Garth was flying, Shania Twain was rocking her leopard print, Alan Jackson was water skiing in boots. 90s country just holds a special place in most country fans' hearts. And sometimes we even get little reminders of that. Back in 2019, there was this one really cool week where the top 3 albums on Billboard's country album chart all came from Hall of Famers that were huge in the 90s. We had George Strait, Reba McEntire, and Brooks Dunn in the top 3. And yes, that was 2019, not 1992. And it's actually Brooks Dunn that I want to talk about in today's video because there's been a lot of talk about, and we are in the midst of, a new wave of neo-traditionalism where the fiddle-heavy tunes from artists like The Chicks, like Alan Jackson and Randy Travis, is seemingly having a huge effect on the music of today. And while those artists were massive, I would argue that Brooks Dunn has been the most influential legacy act in the coolest country music of today. From collaborating with Luke Combs to Casey Musgraves covering the duo songs to getting a #1 album of their old hits, they are as cool and relevant as ever right now. And while they may not be quite as lauded as artists like George Strait and Alan Jackson, Brooks and Dunn are quintessential country music legends, and their honky tonk style directly influenced the biggest chart toppers of today. So I guess the 90s never went out of style.
We gonna paint the town a black tanner, the party starts taking in line.
Kix Brooks was born in 1955 in Shreveport, Louisiana, and he went on to move to Nashville, Tennessee in the early 80s. He found work as a staff songwriter, and he co-wrote Modern Day Romance, which became a #1 hit for the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band in 1985. A few years later, in 1989, he released a self-titled album through Capitol Records, which included the minor hit Sacred Ground, which actually would go on to become a much bigger hit years later for a band called McBride and the Ride. While Kix was cutting his teeth in Nashville, Ronnie Dunn was trying to make a music career happen in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Although he was born in Coleman, Texas in 1953, Ronnie Dunn spent much of his young adult life playing honky-tonk bars in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the same town that's produced acts like Turnpike Troubadours and, more recently, Zach Bryan. While he had released a few singles in the mid-80s to minor success, everything changed for Ronnie Dunn in 1989. He entered and won a talent competition sponsored by Marlboro, for which the top prize was getting to go to Nashville and have a recording session with the ubiquitous producer Scott Hendricks. Scott was so impressed with Ronnie's abilities that he recommended him to Tim Dubois at Arista Records. Tim was deeply intertwined in Nashville. Not only had he written a bunch of hit songs, but he was on a hot streak because he'd just signed Arista's first star, Alan Jackson. Throughout his time in Nashville, Tim had been keeping his eye on Kix Brooks. So when he was introduced to Ronnie Dunn, he suggested that the two of them form a duo. After they recorded a few demos, Tim quickly signed Ronnie and Kix to his label, and in 1990, Brooks and Dunn was born.
I go flying down that highway to that hideaway.
Brooks and Dunn wasted no time becoming hitmakers. Their debut single, Brand New Man, was released in June 1991, and it hit #1 on the Hot Country Songs chart.
I used to have a wild side, they say a country mile wide. I'd burn.
An album of the same name was released later that year, and it went on to become a smash success, selling over 5 million copies, and honestly, that album is iconic. The follow-up singles, My Next Broken Heart,
Working on my next broken heart.
Neon Moon,
Oh, if you lose your one and your only.
and Boot Scootin' Boogie all hit #1.
Come on, baby, let's go.
And Boot Scootin' Boogie actually helped start a line dance craze that took the country by storm. It was assisted, of course, by Billy Ray Cyrus's Achy Breaky Heart. Like so much 90s country, their debut album had a poppy sensibility about it, and it packaged rowdy honky-tonk energy in a way that was more accessible for mainstream audiences. The songs were short and sweet. I mean, the whole album is just about 30 minutes long, and it was most importantly fun. The album features the guitar work of Brent Mason, the same man that created that lick at the beginning of Chattahoochee, and whose guitar playing helped define the sound of that era. And while Ronnie Dunn's vocals have always been the main attraction in their music, it was Kix Brooks' exuberant style on stage that made them a must-see act live. Audiences couldn't get enough, although critics weren't sure what to do with this new band. In a 1993 issue of Entertainment Weekly, music critic David Brown gave their sophomore album, Hard Working Man, a C, comparing them to country junk food. He argued that while their individual songs were sometimes satisfying, they didn't make a cohesive product. But even he had to admit, Brooks and Dunn know what the average country fan wants, and they deliver it in bushels. For the segment of the audience that consists of disillusioned baby boom rock fans, they are more than happy to supply a batch of polite heck raisers with a rock beat. For the more introspective part of the crowd, read women, Dunn doles out maudlin, sensitive guy ballads, Garth Brooks light. Not only do they know which buttons to press, but they press them hard. Regardless of critical opinion, though, in the decade that followed their smash debut and follow-up sophomore record, the band continued to rack up multi-platinum hits like She Used to Be Mine.
Oh, she used to be mine.
Or My Maria, which was a cover of the 1970s B.W. Stevenson hit. The band was so beloved that they won Vocal Duo of the Year at the CMA Awards and the ACM Awards 13 times each. Now, when Brooks and Dunn weren't having clothes thrown at them, they were still getting attention for the clothes that they were wearing, and it's worth stopping and thinking about the role that their presentation played in their success. They were known for their very cool Western wear and Western aesthetics and loud, colorful, patterned shirts. Long before Guy Fieri was the king of the flame shirts, it was Kix Brooks that was the king of the flame shirt, and they even had a whole line with the Western wear company Panhandle Slim, and you could have flames, you could have stars, you could have Navajo patterns, and in researching for this video, a lot of people are still selling those things on eBay, and I think they look kind of cool. And it was really Kix that was wearing those type of shirts. Ronnie usually kept things a little simpler, opting for all black, sometimes a cutoff, sometimes showing off his cowboy forearm tattoo. But he was the more laid-back one, and Kix was really the Western fashionista. It's a dynamic that's not dissimilar to kind of what Dan and Shay do, where Shay is usually dressed kind of normal, and Dan is dressed, you know, the way Dan dresses. Coming out of the 70s and 80s when country music was so often criticized for just trying to mimic pop music and really sanding off the edges that made country country, the Western aesthetic was so cool and it helped define so much of the early career of people like Garth Brooks, think of his big blocky shirts, or Reba McEntire, who was proud to own her rodeo past. I've always heard that fashion runs on a 30-year cycle, and if the fashion of today is any indication, I would say that's true. Cody Johnson, Ian Munsick, and Midland are some examples of artists that are bringing that Western wear to the forefront of culture once again. In a phrase, pearl snaps are back. And I'd also say that Ronnie Dunn's hair deserves a shout out for being low-key iconic. Although I can't really categorize it. It's like halfway between the Rachel and a mullet. Or like a hybrid of Keith Urban and Sharon Osbourne. Or a Yorkie and Nancy Grace. Or maybe it's like a reverse Kate Gosselin. It's like the original Karen cut. Whatever it is, it's gotta be one of the most iconic haircuts in all of country music.
I can't read the book.
Brooks and Dunn remained a powerful force throughout the 90s, and although they faced a few years of waning sales at the end of the millennium, they caught a major second wind heading into the 2000s. Their smash album Steers and Stripes launched hit singles like Only in America, and Ain't Nothing About You, which I must say is probably my favorite cover Taylor Swift has ever done. After that, they went on to score huge hits like Red Dirt Road, Play Something Country, and their rare, stark ballad, Believe, which is a real statement about faith and death that is aging into one of their most famous songs. Still, despite their success, as the 2000s wore on, it was becoming clear that the members of the duo were hoping to pursue some solo ventures. That certainly seemed to be the case in 2006 when Kix took over the syndicated radio show American Country Countdown with Bob Kingsley. That's a program he still hosts to this day, and for which he has won Broadcaster of the Year at the CMAs 3 times. In fact, he was the first person to win CMAs as both an artist and a broadcaster. In 2009, the band formally announced the hiatus and decided to pursue solo projects, and then went on a farewell tour called The Last Rodeo. Now, in the time that followed the tour, Ronnie Dunn released 3 separate solo albums between 2011 and 2016 to minor success. His biggest hit was 2011's Bleed Red, which reached number 10 on the chart. Meanwhile, Kix Brooks put out one album in 2012 called New to This Town, although it really failed to gain much traction.
Play something country.
Many people can't understand why the members of a duo at the top of their game would decide to go solo. And that's because people like duos. I mean, when you think Casey, you also think JoJo. When you think Maddie, you also think Tay. Country music has perhaps the most disproportionate number of duos of any musical genre. But that said, it's also got no shortage of duos with internal tension or that famously broke up. The members of Florida Georgia Line are each making their own projects. The members of Sugarland have done the same in the past. Even the Judds took a nice long break when they found it too challenging to work together. And I think I can understand how being in a duo would be uniquely challenging, because it's a constant clash and compromise of 2 separate artistic visions. It's like a work marriage, but with touring and alcohol and fame added into the mix. In some ways, I think being in a group or band would make it easier to communicate and compromise because you're one of like 5 voices, not just one of 2. You know, you're just 20% of the mix here. So especially in a situation where a duo is assembled the way Brooks and Dunn was, presumably to marry the vocal power of Ronnie Dunn with the showmanship of Kix Brooks, I can understand how resentment could build between the two of them. I can imagine it's easy to become frustrated that you're always spoken for and never just speaking with your own singular voice. Sometimes I think duo members just need a break. They need a chance to spread out their own wings and do their own thing for a little bit, lest the resentment between the two of them build. Although Kix and Ronnie have always kept things very cordial, so, you know, I'm implying some things that haven't been said out loud, but it feels like human nature.
Mama, don't get dressed up for nothing.
After those years of solo endeavors, fans were overjoyed when Ronnie and Kix reunited for a series of concerts in Las Vegas in 2015. And just a year after that, they recorded together for that crazy country crossover event, Forever Country. And in 2019, the duo announced Reboot, an album that was made up of new imaginings of their biggest hits that would be performed both by them and some of the newer stars of today. They allowed artists like Casey Musgraves, Thomas Rhett, and Cody Johnson to reinterpret their songs in their own artistic styles, which not only made the album a really fun and interesting listen, it also introduced the music of Brooks and Dunn to all their fan bases. I think this is one of the smartest compilation albums that's ever been recorded. And now I feel like you cannot deny how influential Brooks and Dunn is proving to be in the biggest music of today, because a lot of these artists grew up listening to them. Luke Combs proudly wears his Brooks and Dunn fandom, both literally on his shirts and musically in tracks like One Too Many, which evoke their sound and also feature the band.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, too many.
Luke employs the same honky tonk country meets pop rock accessibility that made the band popular. And so do artists like Tristan Merez, who collaborated with Ronnie Dunn on Where the Neon Lies, and even sometimes Kane Brown, like on his current single, Like I Love Country Music.
Top to bottom, perfect, you're like Brooks and Dunn's debut album.
And the list goes on and on. John Party and Midland have achieved massive modern success with a sound that is not far off from the classic Brooks and Dunn sound. Buzzy artists like Parker McCollum and Jake Worthington just guested on Ronnie Dunn's new album that dropped last week. It's quite good, by the way. Morgan Wallen just covered Neon Moon. Miranda Lambert recently came out on stage with the band. I mean, their old songs are becoming TikTok dance trends. Brooks and Dunn really seem to be as relevant and influential as ever, with a whole group of fans that were probably in diapers when they were getting their first #1 hits. And maybe there's a lesson about legacy here for us. Brooks and Dunn used to take a lot of flack for dumbing down country music and making brazen party tunes. Country junk food, remember? In a way, it's not dissimilar to how Florida Georgia Line were received early on in their run. In a piece from a few years ago on Saving Country Music about Brooks and Dunn's legacy, writer Kyle Coronios argues, yes, it's often true that nostalgia and the loss of quality and taste in the country music present tense can magically rehabilitate music that at the time was seen as subpar compared to its predecessors. But he doesn't think that's exactly what's happening here. Their early output isn't just easy to listen to, it's outright legendary. Neon Moon, My Maria, and Brand New Man are now all undeniable country music standards. Brooks and Dunn's music featured rollicking, real instruments, whether it was those iconic Brent Mason guitar lines, or pedal steel, or the keys, or the fiddle. It was all there. It had some of the best vocals ever recorded in country music, and above all else, it had fun. Dancing, romance, laughter, and that certain je ne sais quoi that just makes music so great. It's enough to make even the snobbiest music listener want to get up and do the boot scootin' boogie. So that's it. That's my little retrospective of Brooks and Dunn. And I'd love to know your thoughts on the duo, your thoughts on their favorite song. It can be a hit or a deep cut, or it can be whatever else you want to tell me. Put it in the comments down below. If you liked this video, I'd love if you liked it or shared it with a Brooks and Dunn fan in your life. And if you're new here, my name is Grady. I talk about country music on this channel, and I'd love to have you part of the family. Hit subscribe and, come back for more. I have everything else, like my social media and like a Spotify playlist and merch. All that stuff is linked in the description down below. I love you guys, and I'll see you soon. Bye.